Hopefully you remember from earlier in the week that we talked about how although fats contain a lot more energy than carbohydrates do, we aren't able to use fats as efficiently. And today we'll talk about how activity intensity affects what fuel sources we use. So in order to do that, we're going to cover these outcomes. So I want you to take a look at this figure and think about what it is trying to show. On the x-axis, we have exercise duration in seconds. On the y-axis, we have the percent of total energy coming from each of the three main energy systems, which are the phosphagen, which is ATP-PCR, glycolytic, which is glycolysis, and then oxidative, which is Krebs and the electron transport chain. Now, there are a few things I want you to see. All systems are active at all times. Okay? Might not be very much at times, but they're all active. The ATP-PCR system is primarily active during the first few seconds of exercise. Glycolysis is primarily active during those first 2 minutes, and the oxidative system is primarily active after 3 minutes. So while the energy systems are not activated at the same time or to the same effect, the energy we use is primarily dependent on the intensity of the exercise. Fats are the primary fuel source during rest and low-intensity exercises. Carbohydrates are the primary fuel source during high-intensity exercise. This leads to the crossover. So the crossover is the intensity where we start relying more on carbohydrates instead of fats. Okay, and we can see that right here. Okay, and that occurs at about 60 to 65%, depending on some things. Okay, now while it might seem counterintuitive that we rely on carbohydrates during high intensity exercise because we have a huge supply of energy from fats. Additionally, fats produce much more ATP than carbohydrates. Okay? However, the problem with fats is they take longer to break down and they require more oxygen to produce energy compared to carbohydrates. Consequently, during high-intensity exercise, when we have a very high demand of ATP, we don't have the ability to just wait for fats to produce ATP. In other words, we need to produce a large amount of ATP as efficiently as possible. Using carbohydrates allows us to do this. Now, interestingly, endurance training can change the intensity at which this crossover effect occurs. Endurance training causes the body to be able to use fats more effectively. And the benefit of this is that we are able to hold on to carbohydrates until we reach higher intensities, which means we're going to have more energy for those higher intensity activities. And it's important to know the crossover effect can also be affected by diet. So after this lecture, I hope you understand how the energy systems and fuel utilization are affected by time and/or intensity. So see if you can answer the following questions. Explain how exercise duration affects which energy systems are being used. Explain what we mean by crossover effect. And describe or explain why carbohydrates are utilized during high-intensity exercise instead of fats.